Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with the final hot take of the evening. I came across this Mises Institute article. The media is now openly pushing for secession as the election nears. For those of you who don't know, the Mises Institute at Mises.org is it's the scholarly end of libertarianism, for now anyway. So they have a lot of pretty good articles, I think, and recommendations and books and podcasts and videos. So if you want to know about real libertarianism, it's a good place to go. It's not the party per se, the Libertarian Party, but so you're not going to see a bunch of stuff. I don't think there's anything about Joe Jorgensen here. It's a has to be scholarly and not political. But you will, see a ton of stuff about libertarian ideas. And secession is an interesting one because libertarians support peaceful secession. And there's been tons of articles about there was a secession early on in America prior to the Civil War where New England wanted to secede and almost did peacefully. And then the argument during the Civil War, one of the arguments, it's a very complicated subject, but, that Lincoln should have allowed the Confederates to secede peacefully, worked out some sort of deal and allowed them to secede and, sort of split the country in half, and then people wouldn't have died, and perhaps eventually the country would have come back together, and that or maybe not. Maybe we'd still, maybe they would have kept slavery going on for another decade or so, and then later been forced to abandon it. I mean, who knows how history would have played out if it had done it that way. But the idea is that the United States is made up of 50 states that are really like 50 little countries, and that it's a federation and it's voluntary, and they should be allowed to leave, assuming, all their ducks are in a row. Like, some states owe the federal government tons of money, and, they'd have to pay that back. That would be one of the first things they would need to do. Along with a few other things. And over the years, I mean, the bureaucracy of the federal government's gotten so vast. I mean, the very idea that a state would now secede is just, it's just ridiculous to most people. But, so let's dive into this article a little bit and see what the more scholarly libertarians say about the secession. This is from October 7th. It's becoming increasingly clear to even mainstream media outlets that things are unlikely to return to normal after the 2020 election. No matter who wins, it's likely the losing side will regard the winning side as having to have obtained its win using dirty tricks, foreign meddling, or through relentless propaganda offered up by a heavily biased and one-sided news media. And if about half the country regards the winning president as illegitimate, where does one go from there? The survey data isn't exactly calming on the issue. As reported by Politico last week, the percentage of Americans who believe it is justified to use violence to, quote, advance political goals has quadrupled since 2007 for both Republicans and Democrats. After all, political invective has reached a fever pitch since Hillary Clinton declared that a sizable portion of the United States population constituted a, quote, basket of deplorables. Perhaps not since the 1870s and 1880s, when Catholics, Southerners, and Irish, all core constituents of the Democratic Party, were denounced by Republicans as spies, traitors, and drunks, has half the country so despised the other half. As early as 2017, when asked of the chances of another civil war in the United States, about a third of the foreign policy scholars polled said it was likely. Perhaps then it is not shocking that we are now seeing articles, even in mainstream publications, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the United States can't continue in its present form. Moreover, its view is now increasingly being promoted by writers and ideologues outside the usual conservative and libertarian groups that have long advocated in favor of decentralization and local control. See, that's one of the, I don't know if I'd call it a pillar, but one of the important sort of precepts of libertarianism and to some extent conservatism, that really the federal government here is just too big, too controlling, and it needs to be more decentralized. Continuing. On September 18th, for example, Steve Chapman in the Chicago Tribune asked, "Can the United States survive this election?" For the past century, the answer given by most any mainstream journalists would have been a decisive yes. The usual narrative has long been this: of course America will endure for centuries to come. We Americans are masters of compromise. We'll all soon realize that we're all in this together and come together in unity. But now, Chapman writes, the concept of splitting off as American as the 4th of July, the high point of separation sentiment, came after Abraham Lincoln election in 1860, resulting in the Civil War. But New England states contemplated leaving over the War of 1812. The bonds that hold Americans together have frayed, and what happens on November 3rd may do additional damage. No nation lasts forever, and ours won't be the first. The election won't be the end of the United States, but it could be the beginning of the end. Moreover, Chapman notes that while many no doubt will continue to see the United States as strong and likely to endure indefinitely, such assumptions may be unwise given the reality of experience elsewhere. In 1970, the Russian dissident Andrei Amarik wrote a book titled Will the Soviet Union Survive Until 1984. At the time, the idea of a giant superpower disintegrating sounded like a fantasy, but eventually came true. Countries like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia have also broken apart. Britain is leaving the European Union, and Scotland could push to leave Britain. It would be folly to think the United States is immune to these forces. Chapman is not alone. Last month in Philadelphia Inquirer, Chuck Bonfig suspected that maybe the end is near. Let's see, how much more of this do I want to read? But it goes on and on. Let's skip down to only decentralization can save the Union. At this point, there's only one strategy that can prevent a continued slide towards conflict, disunion, and possibly violence: decentralization of political power. Yeah, that's, what I've been saying. I mean, decentralization makes things more balanced. It gives people, forces people to compromise more because everybody has a little bit of power. But it also just makes everything easier to manage. Like, if I'm just managing a little bit of power, it's easy. Managing the entire United States is like, ugh. Continuing, thanks to decades of growing centralization of power in Washington, D.C., American policy is increasingly made by the national government and not by state and local authorities. This means American life is more and more governed by one-size-fits-all policies hatched by faraway politicians in D.C. Thus, with each passing election, the stakes become higher as gun policy, healthcare, poverty relief, abortion, the drug war, education, and much more will be decided by the party that wins in D.C., not by the state capitol or the city council. In other words, the laws that govern Arizona will be primarily made by politicians and judges from other places entirely. These faraway politicians will be more concerned with the needs and ideology of a national party rather than the specific needs of people who live in Arizona. Yeah, I mean, that's my problem with the current governor of New Jersey. I think he's more of a national party guy. He's not a New Jersey guy. And that's the problem with a lot of big career politicians. You look at Hillary Clinton. She moved to New York and became the senator. She wasn't from New York. She didn't really live there. She moved to run there. In a decentralized political scheme, the stakes in a national election are much lower. It doesn't matter as much for Ohioans which party is in power in Washington when relatively few laws affecting Ohioans are made at the federal level. To adopt this way of doing things, however, would require a sizable departure from the current ideology that reigns in Washington. On the left especially, it seems few can imagine a world where people in Iowa or Indiana are allowed to run their own schools and healthcare systems without meddling from Washington, while conservatives efforts to force marijuana prohibition on states like Colorado show that the right is not immune from this impulse. It is abundantly clear that the left is quite enthusiastic about the idea of sending federal enforcers to ensure states enact abortion on demand, adopt Obamacare, and enforce drug prohibitions as dictated by Washington. But unless Americans have a change of heart and begin to decentralize the political system, expect a growing unwillingness to accept the outcomes of national elections and growing resistance to the federal government in general. What follows is unlikely to be pleasant. Written by Brian McMacken. Or Ryan McMacken, sorry. He's a senior editor at the Mises Institute. So, yeah. So, you know, if the federal government didn't have a lot of power, you know, and for instance, I'll give you an example. By the Democrats changing the rules on who approves and how the Supreme Court judges, you know, how many votes you needed. Initially, you needed 60. I'm going to put you down, Joan, because you're very squirmy. Initially, you needed 60 votes to approve a judge, and they cut it down to 51 because, oh, we'll do it faster. Well, no, it was really about them being able to pick the judge. So they, here, go eat something, whatever you want to do. Oh, almost dropped it. There you go. Oh, my earphones won't move. Sorry. By cutting it back to 51, you know, they made it less of a compromise. And they screwed themselves. Because now Amy Coney Barrett is going right in to the SCOTUS position. They screwed themselves by making it, you know, changing the rules. That's why you don't change the rules. You know, they talk, oh, maybe we'll pack the court. I mean, that's changing the rules. You're going to screw yourself that way, too. Because if you pack the court, then the Republicans will eventually get back in power, and they'll pack the court. So, don't change the rules. Work within the rules. This is part of the leftist ideology. Part of their problem. And the right is not only bad about things like drug prohibition, where they're still, you know, morally outraged by certain things. They also still, some of them are still anti-porn. So, you know, you can't let the Republicans run everything either, because they'll eventually start, oh, we gotta cut back on porn. Yeah, this is an issue I can run on. Yeah, we're gonna tax porn, or we're gonna make the internet safe for your children, and blah blah blah. No, we don't want that either. So you need a balance, and that's why decentralization works, because you have a bunch of states and they do, you know, everybody does the things a little bit differently. Oh, we do things a little bit differently here in Colorado or New Jersey or wherever. You know, now in New Jersey, I don't like all the taxes and a few other things, but I do like some things in New Jersey. I just think, you know, if we had a different kind of governor, one that was, first off, from New Jersey, and one that was more open, more into freedom, and didn't want to tax everybody to hell, we would have a better state. You know, and once in a while we get that. Once in a while we do get Republican governors, and you know that helps. But I would love to see a Libertarian governor. I would love that. That would be great. You'd have a guy. You know, we haven't had a Libertarian governor yet, but fingers crossed. So, yeah, this is the kind of scholarly thing you can find on the Mises Institute, and it just gives you sort of a different perspective. You know, there's always like, oh, there's only left and right. No, there's other points of view out there, and libertarians are one of them. So check them out. That's it for tonight. I gotta go to sleep, and we will see you tomorrow.